Hi guys, my name is KP, and this is where you introduce yourself.
This is I'm Angela.
And you are listening to. We actually don't know yet. This is a new podcast that we're trying to build up here on the interwebs. You can probably find more information about those about this podcast as we continue on with it on a weekly basis. Basically, talking about our backgrounds, whether it be in creative ventures, publishing, writing, performance. That's basically what we're going to be doing during these times where we talk about podcast. We talk about stuff. Also, probably random stuff as well too, because we both kind of have that personality where we'll just talk about whatever we want to talk about, which is why I'm just gonna say it right now. By the way, you can find me at Kuya Paul Poetry at Kuya Paul Poetry KUYAPAUL Poetry on Instagram, and you can find me at Kuya Paul Games, same thing, but on Twitch as well to streaming. If you are watching right now, we'll also take questions live if you are watching here or on Facebook Live. So just let us know, and then we can go ahead and take any questions as well during the podcast. So let us know. And then where can they find you, Angela?
On Instagram. Well, I have a website. It's www.angelahilario.com. Um, and my Instagram handle is at scrumptious, which is impossible to spell. So it's SCRU. Scrumptious. I don't know if anyone knows, but my Instagram handle is actually from a Saturday Night Live skit because I love Saturday Night Live. So if you know the word, you know my Instagram. Scrumptious lessons.
Scrumptious Lessons. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So yeah. Um. Yeah. Yeah. I always wondered about that. I was like, Scrumptious Lessons. It's so just like, but
Yeah,
it's all.
it's
It's
from
like,
it's from a Will Ferrell skit. So the skit, have you ever heard of Inside the Actor Studio?
yes.
The actor so Will Ferrell plays James Lipton, and
Mm-hmm.
then he's like exaggerating. So he's like, I'm gonna make up a word of how much I love it. It's scrumptious lesson. So
I think I
that's
remember
my
that skit, like vaguely,
yeah
but I remember that skit. Also,
yeah.
I was a huge fan of Inside the Actor Studio. That was a great show. I actually like one thing really loved about that show was just the delving in of technique. And
Mm-hmm.
during that time, I was learning a lot in terms of art, in terms of the kind of the finer points of like technique and technique building
Mm-hmm.
when it came to your craft. At that time, I wasn't really a poet when I really was watching the show, but I felt compelled to just like try to find my um, kind of find my niche in terms of like, well, what kind of like performance outlet would I be using basically. So yeah, I really like that show. So shout outs to James Lipton. Was it James Lipton?
Yeah. Rest in peace, James Lipton. Yeah, he
Oh my
died
gosh.
passed away this year, I think.
Oh, this past year.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
he had his 10 questions from that he like adapted from Proust or something.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
it was like it's adapted. He changed up a little bit of it.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be cool
Every
actually. Like I should look
yeah.
that up. We should go through those 10 questions during the podcast
Yeah,
maybe. 10
definitely.
questions. Okay.
From Jane. Yeah. We're
Um,
getting
we
somewhere.
are getting somewhere. James Lipton. There, James Lipton. 10 questions. Inside the actor studio. It should be here. I will look for it. But in the meantime, while I'm looking for it, we actually had um we actually had like right before we were talking we kind of had this impasse in terms of like we don't really know too much about each other's um backgrounds in terms of like our like creative backgrounds and publishing backgrounds, writing backgrounds, basically what have you. So I thought that this would be a really good time, especially for people just like this is the first podcast that we're doing and they're just trying to figure out who we are, kind of
Hmm.
figuring out, okay, so yeah, like why should we listen to you, what's your background and stuff. So yeah, like I guess we'll start with you uh, in terms of writing, in terms of, and then you did say you had a publishing company as well too. There's a lot of stuff that you're doing, but I don't want to lead you too much. I kind of feel like you can blow your own horn, and then or you can ring your own bell. I don't know what the saying is. You can speak for yourself. And but yeah, so tell me a little bit about yourself in terms of those creative aspects.
So, I consider myself a writer and an actor, but I've always been acting is something that I've done like since college, and writing is something that I've done since I could hold a pencil. Like
Mm-hmm.
writing is something when I started a journal when I was like 6 years old, and then I wrote stories in like computer class when I'm supposed to be doing other work. I would write my own
Mm-hmm.
stories in like third grade. I would like bind my stories and sell them to my friends for
Oh,
like
that's
a
cute.
quarter. Yeah. And yeah, so like my stories when I was young, it's mostly like a cross between Dawson's Creek and Charmed and like Spy Kids.
Okay, so it's
Like I
very
would
kind of
love,
like teen or like what you call it like preteen to teen type
yeah.
stories.
But I wrote this when I was like in elementary school. Like
Oh wow.
I was super into Dawson's Creek and Charmed, and yeah. And
I
then
don't
that
wanna
was like
wait
something, yeah,
for a la-
exactly.
Oh sorry. Say Dawson's Creek. That's all I think about.
Dawson's Creek.
Oh
Team
man.
Pacey all the
Oh
way.
Pacey man, freaking
Team
Pacey,
Pacey.
man.
Anyways, so that was in elementary school. But when I got to middle school, I've gotten like much more lonelier. So I've read and wrote a lot more than I
Mm-hmm.
ever did. And I would always like write my own books and then bind them, like I don't know, just to see the spines and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's something that I've always liked to do. And then when I was 13, I started writing on Fiction Press. I don't know if you know Fiction Press. It's like a fanfiction.net, and then there's fictionpress.com.
Okay.
So fanfiction is for fanfiction and fiction press is for like your own creation. So on that website, I started writing the book that I actually published with my company now. So it took me 10 years to write that book.
Sambam.
It's called Kaleidoscope Light. I actually have it here. Hey, Kaleidoscope Light.
Kaleidoscope's light. Nice.
hmm And yeah, so writing is something that I've always done. And I feel like during when I was trying to get Kaleidoscope's Light published, I was rejected by like every single agent in the world. Nobody wanted my story. But I feel like um I still wanted the story to be out in the world. Like I don't write just so I can read my stuff. I want other people to read it.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to self-publish it, which I would never have considered before. Like I've always thought of myself as a writer who would find an agent and then find an editor, and then you'll get published and then it's in the bookstore. So I never considered myself going that route. But
Mm-hmm.
if I hadn't, I wouldn't have started like my own publishing company, um, which I've started just so I can write in pen with under pen names and possibly publish other people's books. But right now, I'm just concentrating on publishing my own books.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's
Nice.
basically my journey of as a writer. Uh, yeah,
So what's your publishing company called again?
it's called Hollis House because it's named after the town that I grew up in,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in Queens. But every time I mention it, even to other people in Queens, they never know where Hollis is. So,
No,
which
I
is
see.
weird because there's like a whole Run DMC song about Christmas in
In
Hollis, but
Hollis.
no one knows where Hollis is. So, yeah, and I feel like just having that sort of vision of a place, like an actual place where stories can live, that's where I like grew my vision of what I want my publishing company to
Wow,
be.
a place where stories can live. Wow.
Mhm.
Is that not the tagline?
That's the
That is that the
tagline.
tagline. A place where
Yeah.
stories can live. Oh wow, it's
hmm
so awesome. Yeah, man. That's dope. That's dope. That's great. All right.
Yeah.
So
I ha-
how many books have you published so far under the publisher? Under your publisher?
well, I've published two, so this is the second one, but I'm rewriting this because it's very thin. It's a novella, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
rewriting it to be a novel, so that I like depublished it, and then I'm gonna about to republish it. Hopefully
Mm-hmm.
by the end of this year.
Okay.
So just really one.
Just really one and a half,
Yeah,
kind of.
one and a half.
1.5. Okay. And then yeah,
Hmm.
you did say something about like learning that I had a book. I guess that's my transition into me. And in terms of my background. So in my background in publishing, I do have a book, but I'll kind of work backwards. I actually published a book. It's a poetry and memoir book under World Stage Press. Shout outs to Lamert Park, the home of my press. My book though, I was we were talking actually before the podcast, and it is out of publication, so it is waiting to be republished. I've always wanted to retackle a book as well too, and I've always kind of wanted to double down on the idea of memoir. Actually, was inspired, and this is me going back now. Was inspired by an author named, oh no, I can't remember his name. Shoot, Don Miller actually. He wrote a book called Blue Like Jazz. It's a very I don't want to say secular, but it's a very worldly way to tackle very like faith based um, faith based principles. And the way that he'd use it was using so many metaphors, similes about faith, about Christianity, about his journey, that it really compelled me into. I didn't know it back then, but it was kind of compelling me into the arts. I started actually becoming a poet shortly after I was well, I had stepped down from ministry. My background is youth ministry, and as a youth minister, I was just going through a lot of personal stuff, um, stuff emotionally, definitely spiritually, but a lot of it was in terms of just like kind of my personal life goals in terms of the arts, and I didn't know it was even in the arts. That kind of led me into writing. So I'd write memoirs, and then I'd start writing poetry, and after a couple of years, started getting help from mentors in and around my community and my neighborhood. One of them, shout outs to a great friend of mine. In fact, one of my best friends, NAK, or NAK Hip Hop. And he really helped me start my journey. He brought me to my first open mic where I did. And great story about that is basically he brought me to an open mic and there was a sign up sheet. So like I saw the sign up sheet with names and emails, so I put my name into my email. And then I went over there to my friend who was sitting down and is like, "Hey, did you sign up?" I was like, "Yeah, it's like the email list, right?" And he's like, "No, that's the sign up sheet, man. You're gonna go." I was like, and he's like, "No, don't worry." Like he went to me, he's like, "No, don't worry about it. I'll get you off the sign up sheet." And I told him, "Nah, keep it in." And he's like, "What?" It's like, "No, I got something." And like lo and behold, I actually did work on a poem a couple weeks before that, and I ended up that was my first poem. I performed it. I had to read it over my phone, but I performed it, and I was just like, "Huh, this is a thing, isn't it?" And like I did that for several years. Got invited to the press several years later. In fact, the first time I was invited by the head of publishing, Hiram Sims, who founded World Stage Press, where my book was published. He invited me actually to a round of classes where they basically get students into a 10-month publishing course, and then after that, basically promise them that they'll be published after. Because the whole idea is to teach you how to go from being a poet, a writer, and going from that mainstay and learning how to write for a book. But the first time I rejected it. The first time I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll totally call you." Didn't call him for like 2 years. That being said, I was going to other open mics, and met two more of my mentors in terms of poetry and in terms of performance on stage. The very world famous, renowned, and I believe he was also on Def Poetry Jam, of the Filipino poet named Bosia. So he was one of my mentors. Actually, got me through. Even later on, when I was going through the publishing portion of my book, he really taught me a lot about performance on stage. And then another really huge shout outs to my mentor and my ate, Lady Ariana Bosco, or she's also known as Lady B, the only daughter of the Bosco family, who so happens to also be an actress, stage actress, TV and movie actress as well too. and also a world-renowned poet. And she taught me so much about the emotional process of going and creating. I actually took a creative class with her several years ago, and really skyrocketed my idea of how not just to create and perform, but to create and continue to produce. Actually, that's basically what I'm doing right now. In terms of the book and in terms of like my process into publication, I went through a course load known as CLI, or Community Literature Initiative, which is based in USC and run by Professor Hiram Sims. Went through the 10-month course, and after that, I was offered a publication opportunity under World Stage Press in Limerick Park. That was, I believe, 2000. I want to say 2016. Ever since then, I've been writing blog entries, producing as well too. Ended up producing two music videos under my friend NK Hip Hop. Also did several other production. Also got into photography, so I do also have my own studio, Lonely Bird Studios. We'll do basically anything from red carpets to your debut. We'll do it all.
And
um,
pageants.
and
Pageants.
pageants. Oh, that's right. Actually, I actually got a shout out at the pageant you and our good friend Faith were in. Actually, I got a good shout out from their shooting with the camera. I didn't shoot with anything else but a camera. But when you say it's like I was shooting the girls, I'm like, wait. So I was shooting the pageanteers. That still sounds bad when you say you're shooting them. I was capturing. No, I can't say capture the pageanteers. I was, but I was taking pictures.
You were
I was
recording them
recording them
through
through
visual
film,
media.
through film, hopefully with their
Yeah.
permission. But yeah, so like in terms of creative process, there's so many outlets. Recently, in the last 6 months, I have been doing a lot more streaming. So the online streaming, live streaming, I've become basically kind of a jack of all trades, which I'm slowly finding out that is part of becoming a producer, going into production, and it's one thing that I really love to do. In doing all the other production I've done with other companies, that was basically my wheelhouse. I would even tell my one of my directors, shout outs to Sammy Cinema. I'd even tell her, do me like not do me, like let me do anything except anything that has to do with the camera. I'll do everything else. Like I'll do everything before, I'll do everything after, I'll set everyone up, I'll invite everyone, I'll get you extras, I'll do cast craft service, I'll do everything, but don't let me be at the shoot date because it's like everything else everything else I like doing. I like organizing, I like putting those things together. But that's pretty much like the gamut of me in terms of like a creative. I've gone through so many outlets, and I'm kind of looking forward to like what's happening now in terms of creatives, in terms of, and I've heard this a lot, especially with other creatives that have, like, let's say you are spoken word artists, really great places over here, especially in the LA scene, for open mics, for features. There's so many different places where you can get well known as a spoken word artist, but like, what happens when you don't have an audience to speak to, or where do you find the audience to speak to? And that's one of the things I'm actually really excited about the time that we're in right now. Even though it is a very perilous time, it is kind of letting us reevaluate. It's like, is just being in front of a person or in front of a crowd the only way that we can get known, or are there other production outlets, other places where you can find your audience and still let your art kind of run free? So
Mm.
I'm really looking forward to what's going on right now. And go ahead.
Do you have like an inspiration during this time, like someone who's inspiring you, um or something like an entity or whatever? Like, is there something that's particularly motivating you during this time?
Also, like in terms of like this the streaming landscape right now, it's actually doing really well. I mean, I'm gonna shout out like my own stream, Kuya Paul Games on Twitch.tv. And one thing is, I'm really noticing like the audience is building up. That being said, I've noticed that it's building up here, and like through the things that I'm doing, because I've been watching these other people on the same platform really be successful. Shouting out to a friend of mine, her name is Sarah Zale. She just started a couple months ago on the same platform on Twitch with the live streaming. She does video games as well too. Funnily enough, she's actually a performer. So she's a well, at least within the Filipino community here in Southern California, she was a well known actress. She was doing a lot in terms of that, but just things weren't clicking in terms of her career. Great performer, great artist, just couldn't find like those certain outlets. And the fact that she didn't give up and she just kept going to find out like what her niche was is very motivational for me. There's another streamer. I'm very motivated by him because he's my age. In fact, he's actually maybe I think 1 or 2 years older. His name is Bruce Green. He was the head of production and director of operations for a YouTube channel called Funhouse, which is under a larger MCN or multi-channel network called Rooster Teeth. I don't know if people know that. If you're nerds like Ruby, Red versus Blue, so they're like widely known within basically the online entertainment landscape. He decided to leave once things got a little bit more corporate. They got bought out by AT&T and Time Warner and Warner Brothers, and he's just like, well, let me just create my own thing. Like I know how to do branding. Why am I doing it for like a corporation and a conglomerate when I can just brand myself? And that's motivating to me, especially as a creative, because sometimes we need that reminder that's yeah, okay. I mean, I'm gonna get real with you for a second, like for reals. Like, don't you feel sometimes as a creator, like when you see other people creating things that are similar to yours, you feel like, why am I creating my thing? Because this other.
I I feel like anxiety,
Mm,
like, oh my God, I have to finish this before, like,
yeah.
before this becomes like a thing. But I've learned, because that's happened to me a lot of times,
Mm-hmm.
especially because I've written a lot of young adult books, and I found like every time I would check Twitter or something, someone announces a story that's similar to mine. So I'm like, oh my God, like I gotta finish this. But
Mm-hmm.
like once you look deeper, I don't really think that. First of all, I think that every story is already written. Like there's not really that much originality out there,
Mm-hmm.
but everyone is different, so everyone brings their own experience, their own style to it, and so it becomes different.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at something deeper, if you research it, you will find that, oh, it's actually not the same as what I'm doing, and I've never found something that's like exactly the same as what I'm doing. And there's like some art that's like inspired by something else, but it's never the same. So I would feel like this anxiety at first, but then I would be like, oh wait, it's not actually what I'm making, so it's
Mm-hmm.
okay.
I'll be honest, like in terms of my creative process, I'm the first part, and I've been the first part for longer than I'd like to be. Where I'd see someone's like, well, they're already creating. Why do they need my version of it? And
Mm.
like as a creative, in all honesty, like that stifled me a lot in terms of the creative process. In terms of like, I've learned so much in terms of like even just multimedia landscape of streaming. I learned so much throughout the years, but I never really used it for my own. And it's funny, I just had a conversation with a friend about that, and the same friend that's streaming, and she basically is like, "Oh, I finally found my niche," because she never gave up. But for me, I feel like it's a little different on my end. It's that like I gave up so many times because I thought no one was looking for it. Because it's like there's always a better product than yours, but like just as you said, it's like not every story, like even though every story has been written, not every story is exactly the same. And that was my conviction. My conviction was just like, well, someone need like, even though like maybe there are ones that are objectively, like maybe they had a bigger budget or something like that, they could be similar to the story or the type of artwork that you're creating. There's nothing as unique as what you're creating personally.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my biggest convictions was is like knowing that someone needed to hear your story, someone needed to have your outlet. One of the things that I've really enjoyed in terms of streaming in this past month is that I've been meeting new people all across the world. I think one of our first live participants and live audience, he was from Norway, and he was just logging on, just looking to see what he can watch on Twitch, and he just jumped onto our podcast. And funnily enough, we were talking about losing someone, and then he started talking about his mom, and I was like, it's like, what about it? It's like, well, I lost her, and it was kind of his question of faith, is like, well, like like is that also like in lieu of like God's promises of God, like in terms of death, in terms of losing someone? And we had this whole big conversation. That being said, there's no one else in the entire world at that time that could have talked to him other than him dropping into our channel. And I feel the same way in terms of just like, at first I'd be like, no one's gonna read my poetry. Who would read it if there's other great poets out there? But instead, I started thinking, I wrote this like, I mean, even on a spiritual level, it's just like, well, maybe God put me here to write this poem. Maybe not for a billion people, but maybe because this one person, at least at first, this one person needed to hear it at this time. And then you
Mm-hmm.
find out later that that piece of art, that piece of creativity, um, was for a lot more people than you could have calculated. A lot more people that you would have bargained for, and to miss that opportunity, like that's my heart. I don't want to miss that
Mm-hmm.
opportunity again. So yeah, I'm actually kind of motivated in the fact that you have that mindset. That it's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's like someone needs to hear the story. Someone, like, there's no two stories that are exactly the same.
Yes. I feel like if you just can impact just one person, I feel like that just shows like how much we as Christians, we as humans
Hmm.
value lives, is that even one life counts, especially as artists.
Hmm.
But for me to answer my own question,
Okay.
it's not as depth as yours,
Okay.
but like I've been like binge watching like interviews of Prince, like so much. Like he is like my number one inspiration as a writer, which is ironic because I don't write songs at
Hmm.
all. Like I barely even write poetry. But for him, like for me, it's like just hearing him talk
Hmm.
is just so motivating because he was someone who, first of all, he was a man of faith. Like his relationship with God was very important to him. Second, he produced as if like his life depended on it. Like
Hmm.
he never stopped writing. I even heard like in the shower he has like a notepad just in case like inspiration strikes him in the shower, and he
Hmm.
can write it down. And he never stopped recording. And third, like he was just like a man of integrity in terms of as an artist. Like he had problems with his record label and in terms of like ownership of his music. So he separated himself as an artist. That's why he was known as a symbol for a long time.
Oh yeah, I
Um,
remember that. Well, I remember
yeah,
that time
like
where he was just like, I'm just going by this thing, and it was just like the
yeah,
symbol with the arrow. Yeah.
and that's just and then he distributed his own music. And as a writer who self-publishes, I think that's just so inspiring to see like this man who was like a genius just taking things into his own hand and not needing someone like a powerhouse behind him in order to get work out. And as a publisher, as a micro self-publisher, very small, that's very inspiring to me because it's like, okay, so no one of like the big five publishing houses wants my book, and
Hmm.
that's fine. But that doesn't mean that there's no worth, there's no value in my work. It's just they don't like it. Like the people at the head of those houses don't like it,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean that there isn't a girl or a boy out there who would like my book or relate to my book. So that's what I've been doing in this quarantine. Like I every time I hear him speak, it's like it just breathes life into me as an artist.
That's interesting. I have heard like a lot of like he had a very um I mean, I don't say this in like kind of I just can't find the other word or any other word, but like he had a very quirky demeanor, is what a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people would kind of describe. But in terms of like creativity, like that's kind of par for the course sometimes. A little bit. I mean, I've met people who are very quirky. I mean, I want to say quirk. And I don't mean like the anime terms of quirk and like academic, oh no, whatever. Anyway, sorry, my nerd's coming out a bit when you say quirk. Oh, she had a quirk. I'm like, no, no, she's quirky. Like no, like no. But no, but it's just like but there's a certain way that like in terms of the artistic endeavor, like people kind of see the world, like especially as feel we're going down a rabbit hole. I feel like when I say this, like as Filipino Americans, and in terms of the Filipino American journey, second, third generation journey, in terms of like finding our identity as both Filipino and American, or as like me and my dad actually like to call American Filipino. Like he even says to me, it's like, you're not really Filipino because you didn't go to Philippines. You're Filipino because of family, but you were raised in America, so you're more American than Filipino in that regard. That's not to like take away from my roots, but it is to recognize the fact that my upbringing was here. Like, but that being said, in terms of in terms of just life journey, and in terms of priorities, especially as a creative, there's always like a sort of conflict between two generations. Whereas, and I've had discussions about this with my friends, like the discussions of socioeconomic priority, such as do you prioritize like the idea of like house and lot, like, or do you prioritize the idea of like like journeys, and I don't want to say vacations, but just like having the flexibility going around and not being in one place. Whereas like our like the previous generation with our parents, or at least my parents, traveled from the Philippines to establish a life here. So their full on life goal was to establish and kind of make base here and have a successful life. Their successful life being having the job, having a successful income that you wouldn't be able to get in the Philippines, forming a family and live on to retirement to for their apos, and like stuff like that to bless the next generation. Whereas like in some people within our generation, I mean, even though that's also a really great goal, some people in our generation have kind of gone into it other aspects. Filipino Americans, sometimes in particular, do have that essence of identity, creativity, um, and kind of finding the places beyond it. Whereas our parents would really uh, focus on, it's like, hey, get a good stable job. But then when you go into the industry, or you go into things like acting or performance, or like or gig jobs and gig economy, where like you're going from one gig to another shoot to another show, etc., 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 it's not the stability that the previous generation actually worked. I went down a really big rabbit hole, by the way. Like, I went down a huge rabbit hole. I'm surprised you didn't be like, "Hey, wait," like,
I'm like,
but
I'm waiting for the punchline. I'm waiting for the rap.
here's the thing with me: you might not get one because I'm going down this huge rabbit hole, and I forgot what we were first talking about. But like, but I wanted to say that point to forget what we were talking about in the first place because I really did. Why
We
did
were
I
talking
talk
about
about?
Prince, and
Thank
now we're talking
you.
about Filipino
No,
Americans
but
or
just
American
like in
Filipinos.
terms of that, in terms of creativity, because I'm inspired by people like that too. Like I'm inspired by like but they didn't live like a certain lifestyle that like that was pronounced to us as we were growing up, especially as a creative. I was really involved like with these certain, or even in our faith. Like one of the biggest things, like I mentioned a book, Blue Like Jazz, which is a very not like a very secular way of like seeing Christian faith from a Christian, but he wanted to tackle it in a different way. Whereas during that time, that book was kind of shunned by the Christian community, or at least the prevailing Christian community, because and I use this term, and I think you know what I hope you know what I mean when I say this. It didn't sound Christianese enough.
Yeah, I've heard
Yeah, it
Christianese,
didn't sound
Christian culture.
Christianese enough. Like it's like you're not using things terms like righteous and justification. It's like, yeah, no, he's not. He's using creative and metaphoric situations to talk about these terms. He talk about things like faith, but he talk about it through scenarios, through his memoir. It's
I
one of the
really, I really like that idea because it's funny that you mentioned this because
yeah.
I've just like literally like just yesterday I was watching this interview, forgot her name,
Mm-hmm.
but it was with Elevation Church, and she's basically a cognitive psychologist,
Mm-hmm.
and she was talking about how
I know what you're talking
like
about. I
you
forgot to
know what I'm
watch.
talking about.
I didn't watch it, but I heard. I think like one of my
I
family's
think
talking about it.
like I think it relates to what you're saying
Mm-hmm.
because we as Christians we sort of like conform to this culture and we say things just because it sounds right or just because we've heard it so many times before, but
Oh yeah,
actually
you're
we
drinking the
don't
Kool-Aid kind of in that
yeah.
sense. I mean, I don't mean to say it that way, but I'm gonna say it that way. It's like you drink the Kool-Aid
Mhm.
so much. I mean, even for me, I didn't know this is gonna be a faith podcast. Oh, okay, let's go to the faith. Like sometimes like I'll hear entire lessons be like, I'm like, you just like quoted like 5 years of like pastor sermons. You just quoted everything. It's like, but did
Mhm.
you really study anything? Like, did you really go
Or
into the word, or
does it
yeah?
really like impact you in a way?
Mm-hmm.
Like she talked about cognitive dissonance and how like us just saying things but not really meaning it in our hearts will actually lead to
Mm.
brain damage. And I'm like, wow,
That can speak right there.
that's like such a big step to take, but
Yeah.
I can see that where you just where like this not being genuine can actually hurt you. And I feel like that's something that I really value as
Yeah.
artists is
Mm-hmm.
that honesty and that genuineness and telling the truth,
Mm-hmm.
even if you're writing fiction or whatever. It's just telling the truth, telling it how it really is, which is something that I really value in artists. So the poet that you're talking about, even if he writes things in a secular way. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's just how he sees it, and that's how he thinks that his point will get across. Like
Yeah.
that's the medium that he'll get across.
Yeah. There's like this kind of argument with translation. And a lot of the church kind of goes through it a lot where, and this is why sometimes, like, I mean, you see arguments within the churches, like churches like Hillsong. It's like, yeah, so they're like they translate what the word of God is saying, but they translate within like what a generation can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, of course, you hear the argument from the old guard, which is a fair they're both fair arguments. I think you need both arguments to have a very kind of solidified, strengthened, and foundational church. But the argument for the old guard is that, yeah, it's like you want to be careful of reinterpreting what the Word of God says, because you might reach too far. But then the old guard would be like, let's just get it straight from the scriptures. Like, that's great, but the scriptures were translated in such a time where the English of the time was being used. So the vernacular of that English does not relate to the vernacular of the English that we're using today. So, like, use these and thous, and people are just like, yeah, it sounds holier. And it's like, it sounds holier because it's old. So my argument is like, so you're saying that, so that reading it in such a way, like, so reading it in the King James version is like holier, or like, oh, it's like, oh, it's more accurate. I'm like, okay, it's more accurate technically, but like how is it accurate? Is it accurate because it's like word for word, or are you actually hearing and listening to the subtle inclinations of what the word of God was during the time where it was written? Or are you just reading it because it has a thou and a thee, and you think the thou and thee makes it holy? And it's like, you don't even know, like how does that translate into like your interpretation of the word? So, like, there's that very um very like cautious argument. Like, people were saying this, like, when the message translation came out, and I say translation loosely because it's actually a paraphrase, but the paraphrase was created. The message paraphrase was created so the people would understand the idiosyncrasies of what was going on within that particular society, where, like, during the time of Jesus or during the time of the prophets, so they can see the idiosyncrasies and they can understand and relate to it in a modern age. So, like, in that respect and realm, like, that's why I really appreciate, at least in the past, like the books that I was reading, in terms of, and I'm gonna loop this back. Okay, I'm gonna loop this back to like what we were talking, but like, I really appreciate,
The
yeah,
punchline
the
is
punchline.
coming.
So I really appreciate like authors like Don Miller, who push the mark and says, like, I know the church is not gonna like this, but I'm going to use metaphors, similes. I'm going to use my memoirs and my experiences to translate what the Word of God has always been, but I'm going to translate it in such a way that people can actually relate to it in these modern times. I really believe in my heart, what God has had pushed me to in terms of my creativity as a poet, as an artist, as a performer, was to bridge that gap as well too. And one of my personal missions in becoming a poet and a spoken word artist, especially during the within the community here in Southern California, the Filipino American creative arts and industry communities here, is to be kind of that light, because, I mean, Filipino Americans in particular have that background of either like Catholicism or Christianity, or at least some kind of faith-based background. But a lot of them, especially within the industry, have fallen away because it did not feel relevant to them at the time. The moral aspects, the teachings of Christ, and the wondrous love and passion and grace God had in store for them. It wasn't relevant to them because they didn't understand it.
Are
Um,
you explicit as a Christian in your work? Because I that's something that I've struggled with is
mhm,
because my first book, Kaleidoscope's Light, it's basically it's about two teenagers who can remember what happened to them in parallel universes.
mhm.
So they try to manipulate their choices in order to be together. Like it's like a
Well,
romance thing.
it's like a
It's very
butterfly effect too. It's
it's
just
like it's very complicated.
okay, yeah.
But um but basically in the story, the main character, James, he he manipulates a choice, but every time he tries to make a choice, his father always ends up dying. So I but because I wrote this when I was like um from age 13 to 23.
Mhm.
So during that time, like I've always been a Christian, but I've never, because I grew up Catholic, we don't really, it's interesting to grow up as a Catholic, you don't really talk about Jesus a lot. like
Yeah.
like between people.
Mhm.
So I've the entity that sort of protects these characters is God, but I've never mentioned the name God. I always use the word universe.
Mhm.
So because I worry that because this is a young adult novel and I want it to be mainstream,
Yeah.
if I mention God, it's going to turn people off or
Mhm.
something. So that was something that I struggled with as a writer. But now that I'm more matured, I'm more like, who cares about what other people think? I'm a bit more less, but it's still there though. So I'm just curious, as you work, were you explicit? Like, did you?
So I have poems that are very explicit about my relationship with God. I have poems that are not. Um, and I tend to more or less just kind of gauge the audience, especially when doing like spoken word. You're just like, okay, can I do like when you see like four or five like poets go up on like um like on the open mic, and then they're just and like they're super soulful, they're talking about God in their poetry. I was like, I guess I could do my God poem, that's fine. But when you see someone go up and then they're talking about how like like they're talking about their struggles and in a like a binary society, or you're talking about someone who's like struggling with like like their past experiences and being bi or being gay or being homosexual, you're just like, hold on, maybe I need to re-gauge a little bit more. And one thing that I really love about my poetry and like what I've been inspired to do is just like, you don't have to say God, you don't have to say it to know that that's what it is. Like just like what you're trying to do in your book, you don't have to say it's God. um and it's funny, like the Bible says it as well too. The Bible's just like, look and see the glory of the Lord. like like the oceans, the trees, the mountains, they declare his glory. But you never walk like, I don't mean to be preachy right now, but you never walked up to no boulder and then the boulder just like praise the Lord. I'm like, it never does that. You just look at it and then you see the idiosyncrasies. You break the boulder out and you see all the pigmentations and you see all the crystallizations, and then you can see, wow, this is amazing. You go into the oceans and you see the depths of the oceans, and then all the different wildlife going on within the oceans, and how in this very sacred biome everything seems to be fulfilled and nothing is off balance. And you think, wow, so amazing. And I can go on and on and on. But you see, like, even God just like, I don't have to tell this whole world that it's me doing it. When you see it, you know it's me. So I have like this very very big conviction of like, I don't have to tell them it's God until they ask what is it.
Mm.
Like basically like so I just did some money about this really great guy. His name is Ariel. He's a comedian. Pretty vulgar. Like, like you might like the type of poetry that you'll see. It's like definitely late night, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in a CD bar type. That kind of stuff. Great poet, great comedian. He's very funny but very vulgar. That being said, I didn't even do a poem. I was actually doing kind of a memoir and kind of a like an improvisational poem slash memoir on stage. And the way I did it, the way I delivered it, was very heartfelt and very. And I never said God. I never said that this is God does in me. I think I was just talking about relationships and breakups and stuff like that. And then I stepped down, and he walked up to me after the open mic, and he's just like, bro, I'm not Christian. I was like, dude, yeah, of course I know. Like, you're it's your comedy. I know you're not Christian. He's just like, but he came up to me. Is just like, but the thing is, every time I listen to you, I want to be. And it's just like that broke my heart so much. I was like, oh my gosh, that's just like, and that's the thing though. That's when when your intention is there, when your intention is so real, that like that will be the testimony that people come up to. It's just like, well, how do you get like this? Like, why are your emotions, like you're so emotional and you're so thick with emotion, and yet they're so intact. Why is that? And then that's the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So like in like straightforwardly, I don't always. Sometimes I do. Like, if you're a church, I'm gonna do a church poem. I'm totally gonna do one. But at the same time, like, especially within my memoir writings, and you've read them, like you've like shout me out a couple times. I never try to say God unless it just feels like this is a faith moment, and I'm just gonna be real about my faith, not to be preachy, but just to let them know that like no, this is affecting my faith side of me, just like things can affect my emotional sides or my romantic sides, my family sides. This is my faith side. But you've seen in a lot of my writings, need to talk about that. Like I have like one of like my most popular, because people actually like come up to me and it's like, oh, I read that one. One of the ones that people always remind me of is this one where I talked about ramen days. And like there's just some days where you just need a bowl of ramen and a community to remind you that things will be better. And in just the way that I wrote it, people knew. It's like, I get that. Sometimes you need community. Sometimes you need some time. Sometimes you need to cast all your cares upon him because he cares for you, but you need the time to cast it. So like, yeah, like long story short, in terms of your question, yeah, like you don't have to be you don't have to be explicit to be intentional, and
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to be specific to make sure your intentions are out there. Good friend of mine um, said, and I go back and forth on this, but in many times, especially like this time, I definitely agree with what he says. Is like, if your art is good, like it doesn't need anything else around it. Like if your art's intention is there and it's clear, you don't need to fluff it up with anything else. Um, but I agree with that. Like I agree, it's like if your art is there, if your emotions, if your intention is there, and if your intention is to kind of like inadvertently teach God's word and His promises through your art, then people will recognize it, and it will go through, and then you will have those opportunities. But you'll of course have those people that are just like, well, when you're thinking about this and when you're thinking about that, like where did you get that idea? I'm like, there you go. There's your axe moment. People are like, well, how come they can speak our language? Wow, I did not mean to sound that preachy, but yeah, it's a very Acts moment. Like they didn't have to do anything; they just had to show the love of God in the language. Like what I'm talking about in the Book of Acts, like chapter 2, when the day of Pentecost came. Do you know what I'm talking
No,
about? Okay, so
no.
day of Pentecost came. Jesus told them, "Hey, I'm gonna send the Comforter." So they went up into the upper room, and they're like, "Okay, God, where you at?" So the spirit of Pentecost came down them as a comforter, and then that's when they started speaking in fiery tongues. You remember, like they were like fire on their tongue, and then that's when all the disciples from that upper room just rushed out, and then just started preaching the word. But the thing is, it was during a time where a lot of people were visiting Jerusalem, so there were people of different languages, and they're like, how come these bros like be speaking my language? Like they're Jews. Like they're not supposed to speak my language. They're not supposed to speak Chinese. They're not supposed to speak this. They're not supposed to speak that. Like, but they were, and they're like, I understand what you're trying to say, and I understand like the mission, that I mean, not the mission, I understand the language in which you're speaking, because it is my language. You're speaking my language, and I feel like especially like this generation is looking for us to speak their language, like another day of Pentecost. So we got to speak hip hop, we got to speak poetry, we got to speak like short film, we got to speak live stream, we have to speak Instagram, like we have to speak
TikTok.
these, we got to speak TikTok, like legit we have to speak TikTok, because if we could do that, then people will be like, this person's dope, why is this person dope and speaking my language? And then that's when you have your Peter moment, and Peter goes up and says, hey, people of Jerusalem, it's like, hey, people of TikTok, thank you for asking me that. It's because of Jesus. It's because of what he
Mm-hmm.
did in my life. That's why I'm this way. That's why you're like fans. That's why you liked my comment. It's because of Jesus. But you're the one who asked. I didn't
Preach.
ask. I'm just. But like I feel like this generation, is looking for, and you know what's funny, like too, like this is not even my like my personal idea. Actually, I got it from my pastors. We were doing this event called Blank Space at our church, and I was really getting into the open mic poetry scene. And my church actually, like my youth, like bless their hearts, they kind of saw that in me, and then they're all just like, why don't we have an art show at the church? And then we have like artists, we have poets and stuff like that. Kuya, you can actually be one as well too. And then we're just inviting all these other artists. I invited an artist named Jason Chu, who's trying to bridge the gap between the secular and his faith realm. He's a hip hop artist, so we invited him to the church. And at first I was like, oh, I don't know how my like really like traditional pastors and then the whole association of pastors are gonna feel like inviting this guy who does hip hop but also does a lot of secular work too. So I went to the pastors and then I made them the pitch. We want to invite this guy, like well, like you know like he of course he won't do it for free. We have to pay the artist, and then I'm basically pitching this is the budget. And lo and behold, they were just like, do it. And I got surprised at first. I'm like, you're good with it. And then they're the ones that sat me down and it's just like, the reason why we are good with it is because he knows how to speak the language of this generation. So we need someone to speak to help us learn how to speak that language so we can speak to them as well too. And I was like, oh man. Like I got super confused. I was like, that's right. We need a generation that can speak the next generation's language. I mean, this is why I'm like really excited. This is why I'm really excited about like your endeavors in terms of publication. We need someone within the publication realm. We need someone who's writing books again, writing young adult novels, but instead of like sparkly vampires, freaking like and like battle royales, like we need someone to speak the language of this generation to show them the love of God within this generation, not to be explicit, but be intentional.
Mm. Wow. That's great. I don't know how to follow up to that.
Oh well, we are approaching the end of the podcast. So, any final thoughts, in terms of
Um,
creativity? What well, like so? What made you decide like what's the one thing that keeps like the driving force within your writing right now? I mean, I feel like a lot of this is gonna be like faith based now because we've been talking faith a lot, but it doesn't always have to be. But what's your driving
Actually,
force?
like my motivation for writing has like dropped for like the past 2 years. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know why, but it's just been so hard for me to finish something. Like I still write,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so hard for me to finish something. Like this book, Stay Up Here, this one. I only wrote this because I wrote it as a joke for as for my friend.
Mm-hmm.
Like so the book is really about my friend, and I wrote it as like a sort of fan fiction of her own life
Okay.
and the life that she should have. But that was my motivation to write that book. But still, like now it's like it's been so hard for me to finish work and to finish an actual project. I just keep bouncing from one project to the other. So
Okay.
I actually don't have an answer to what keeps me motivated right
Well,
now. Like,
let me rephrase the question then. What has been motivating you? Because there's got to be something like you like. So you talk about like okay, in terms of writing, you're not, but what have you been currently motivated in?
I don't know. Like I feel like the reason why I have so many interests is because I get so bored of it and then I just
Sure,
keep jumping from one thing to the other.
sure.
Like I have motivation to grow as an artist, but I just like actually producing something and like sticking it out through to the end. It's been very challenging for me, especially with writing.
Hmm.
Um but usually like like my recent like novels have been just because of this past. I don't want to say relationship because it wasn't even a relationship, but
Mm.
like
Oh, I
I
know what those are.
like a
We
character,
can have
right?
a
A
whole
character.
podcast on relationships that aren't really relationships.
Oh my
Man,
goodness.
oh my
I
gosh,
feel like
I could
yeah.
talk for hours on that stuff. They're like one of y'all is in a relationship, one of y'all is just like I thought we were friends, or like one of y'all is in a relationship, or just like I don't know.
Like it was just like this whole like thing, but like basically like
Hmm.
just writing of that just as a closure for me, because that really has closure in reality, but
Hmm.
like in my own head, in my own imagination, like I wanted to write something about that, and that has been motivating me. It's just in order to like get it out and just have closure on it.
Hmm.
but that particular person has like inspired a lot of different stories and different books. So like
Wow.
that's what I've been like jumping from to and fro. But usually like generally like music is very like I've written a whole fantasy book just on Lana Del Rey's Born to Die song.
Dang, let's
Like I
go.
like
Okay.
like that the imagination and the visuals that she put into that song, like it's just created like this whole world for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that's something that I finished, but it's not ready for publication. But I
Yeah.
finished that one. But yeah, like music has always been inspiring to me. Like my first book was inspired by a Lily Allen song. Like I love just listening to music and like visualizing things, like
Mm-hmm.
visualizing scenes. Sometimes even like movie trailers ironically inspire me. But yeah,
You know what's funny about? Okay, I have 2 points with what you said actually. Number one, I haven't told anyone this, but there was
we're about to reveal it on the
then so
podcast.
there was one point where like I started getting into because I got into it really late. Number one, but like you know the whole like Filipino American like indie singers like
Mm.
Passion and Jeremy what was his name? I want to say Jeremy Camp because I'm Christian, but hold on, Jeremy Passion. I said Passion. Did I say Passion?
You
And
said
then I
passion.
said Passion, but I meant Jeremy Passion. So like Jeremy Passion, and then Game Bondog, and then AJ Raphael. Okay, so and it's funny because I met this fool like 3 times. I met AJ like we were like after like this whole like you know like the like after the red carpet stuff, so, like everyone goes to like a local bar like a little toga or something. So I met this fool like 3 4 times. I actually had conversations with him, which trips me out because I was like, "You're a song on Spotify. You're not a real person." Like you know what I'm talking about? It's like you're a YouTube channel. You're not a freaking real person. And then I'm talking to him. I'm like, freaking, I'm talking to AJ. I was like, okay, cool, fine. No, but okay. So like all this being said, there was one point where I was like really listening to that freaking like that Phil Am original Filipino American music. You know what I'm talking about? Where
Yeah.
there was one point where just like I want to make a Broadway musical and just use AJ Raphael songs. Like you know what
So
I'm talking about? Oh, I really want to write one, and it's just like because like his one of his famous songs, the whole "I hopped on a train in the afternoon." That one, you know that song?
sing. I don't
Where
know
I'm
what you're
going
talking
back,
about.
but I
I
hope
don't know
that
who
it's
this person
soon. And,
is.
oh, AJ Raphael, you gotta look him up. Freaking look him up, AJ Raphael. But it's basically a song where like he's with a girl, but he had to leave, and then like he tries to come back, but the girl like it looks like the girl's already moved on, like he hasn't talked to him. So it's like he's like it's been 3 years and she hasn't written back, but in my eyes, you are mine, you are mine. Like it's just like a really like it's a really sad song, and like I hear that song and I'm like, this is an entire musical of like this guy leaving for like whatever, like maybe he had a job interview or maybe he had like his like on career like his career in music and stuff, and he tries to go back to his hometown, and then the girl's like not having it anymore. But then it's like this whole like kind of sweet home Alabama type, like I'm going back to my hometown, and then like rekindling the relationship kind of thing. But using freaking AJ Raphael songs to like to tell the whole story. So number one. Number two, I forgot the number 2 point. Wait, hold on. I do this to myself too many times. I'll talk and I'm like, I forgot the second point. Hold on. But the first point was that. The second point was what were you freaking talking about? You're talking about that. Oh, so in lieu of motivation, so my book, The Love Manifesto. The reason I called it The Love Manifesto is because I felt like during the time I was writing the book, during that 10 month cohort, I was trying to court a girl, and in the middle of it she wasn't having it, so like half the poems are me and all my feelings about the girl, and the other half is like all the freaking like oh it didn't work out feelings. So
Mhm.
like my entire book was based upon a situation, like how like the whole not stereotype, the whole thing about like Taylor Swift will have a relationship just to create an album.
Mhm.
I'm not saying this necessarily, but consider like having a journey to get you motivated again. I'm not saying look for.
Getting my heart broken
Oh,
again.
I'm not saying to do it, but like,
No, but like that's actually a really good idea because
yeah,
there's this quote like
yeah,
that it's like poets I'm gonna pretty butcher this.
mm-hmm,
This is not the actual quote, but this is
yeah,
the essence of the quote. Like poets would go out to the rain to get struck by lightning. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
like people will like literally like get themselves to feel things just so they could
Write about it.
like write about it. And that's something that I want to say to people, like don't cross writers, like
Mhm.
don't cross them because you will be
Because they
immortalized
will
in a
write about
book.
you. Like, they
Exactly.
will write songs about you.
And you will be immortalized as this character in their
Exactly.
project. So
Exactly. Or
that's
treat
just
treat an artist well, and then they'll write albums about you. They will write all the different
mm,
things, all the ways that you make them feel and everything. Like,
mm-hmm.
I do see that so much. Like like the first book that I wrote, I never published it, but it like the Love Manifesto actually comes from the title of my first book, was the Worship Manifesto. I was even just learning how to write. That's why I'm never gonna publish it, because like I look at it and I'm like, oh, this thing's a mess. But the reason I was able to write the entire book was like I was going through a lot of stuff within my church. I was going through a lot of stuff in terms of like finding my identity, in terms of the creative, like my creative aspect, and in terms of God as well too. And it's like, how does this all fit in? And the entire book was just me going through that process. So yeah, process really works in terms of motivation. Like I feel like I need to break my heart again just so I can write more love poems again. Like straight up sometimes.
It's just for me, it's not that I don't have ideas. It's just
Hmm.
that like putting it to paper is just so hard.
Yeah.
So it's not like I don't have material, but
Hmm.
it's just the actual doing
Yeah.
it.
But it is that whole like sometimes you need, like, sometimes crisis fuels creativity. So
Hmm.
a lot of times when you don't feel a crisis, you don't feel the motivation. Like you always feel like, because like you said, I'm not, like, this is in no way, I'm not trying to be like I'm not trying to convict you, okay? I'm not trying to. This is not like I'm not your like, what's that freaking Christian term called again? I'm not your accountability. But I'm just saying, like, sometimes you need a crisis. Sometimes you need to create, like, even if it's like a fake crisis or a synthetic crisis. Sometimes crises give you the motivation um of doing it. For example, like for me, or for like a lot of people, sometimes you have to buy something in order for you to say, it's like, now I have to freaking take care of it. Like sometimes you have to,
Mm.
like I do this a lot. Um like I'll buy something, like there'll be like certain products, but I will literally buy a product that's more expensive because I'll know in my head how much it cost me. So because of
Mm.
that, I will take better care of it because it cost me more.
I
If that
can
makes
see the
sense.
point that you're making.
Yeah. So like sometimes it's like, because like especially like as artists, sometimes we're just like, oh, I can write at any time, but then it becomes like you kind of cheapen the aspect of writing if you create a crisis for yourself in terms of like now it's a crisis. Like now something's happened to me and I have to respond. Someone broke up with me. Someone broke my heart, and I have to tell them how I felt because it hurt so much. Like, you know what I'm talking about? Like,
That
yeah.
has happened to me. Like
Hmm.
I met this guy through Tinder. This was
Oh
before I
dang.
was like ultra
Oh,
ultra
we going
Christian.
there. All right.
But like and then he ghosted me and I was
Yeah.
like, you don't ghost me and get away with it. So I
Yeah.
wrote a short story about him and it's actually my one of my best short stories that I've written.
Hmm.
And it was all because he did not leave that closure for me. Like he just ghosted me.
Hmm.
So it's like so I understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
like this need to respond and this need to like
Like
um
create an artificial crisis. Like sometimes you just have to do that to get yourself motivated. Um, for example, it's just like maybe like you do. Oh, this is really good. This is actually what fueled what like my current book that I'm slowly writing, which is, right now it's a working title. It's called Detours, but it is it's a memoir about the 4-day road trip that I took, just several months ago, when I was
mhm,
in Virginia, and we took a cross
mhm.
country road trip back to California, me and my dad. The thing is, I didn't have to do it. Like, I knew for a fact that, like, okay, this is what they were gonna do. They just had to bring the car back from the East Coast to the West Coast. My dad sent it over there. He just paid for the shipping the first time from the West to the East Coast, and it's like, we gotta bring it back. So I saw this as an opportunity. So I created an artificial crisis. I was basically, why don't we bring it back? like I really just pushed myself like this. Like, did I have to do that? Did I have to ask for like a week and a half off from work just to go over here to Virginia to get the car back, to drive cross country through like territories and states that I didn't know, with my dad, who I know is gonna ask me all those questions about my career and about my future, and I'm like, I'm gonna be stuck 5 days, 6 days, 7 days with my dad in the car with all these hard questions. But I was like, no, I'm gonna do it. I have to create this crisis so that change can happen, so that something can be created, something great can be created out of it. And as hard as that trip was, it was also one of the best like moments in my life as well too. So that's what I mean. As a creative, I think as creatives, I think by we're fueled by
Pressure.
yeah, pressure and crises, and not that like we're fueled by like things happening to us, but we're fueled by making things happen to us. I think that's a lot of times.
Mm.
I mean, like, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, but I think that's why some artists get into failed relationships, get into relationships with people that they can't deal with, because they
Mm.
need that emotional pressure all the time, that so
Mm.
that they can write about something, so that they deal about something, so that they find their emotional base when they're acting about something. I'm
Mm.
not saying it's a healthy way. I'm just saying that that's what a lot of times artists do, or creatives
Mm.
do, is they create these artificial crises so they can find their base, and then they can always have a momentum to work.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. That being said, find a guy that'll break your heart. I'm just kidding.
I have enough of those.
Oh
But I feel
dang.
like, I feel like, I just have to find some way to just see something out. Because I have like half finished projects. That's my problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like I need to finish it and not get that inner editor saying like, oh, this is bland, this is blah blah blah, you know.
Do you want
Just get that.
an artificial crisis?
Artificial. No, I
I'll
like
give
my
you one right
life.
now. Like,
I like my life chill right now.
okay.
I like the chillness
Which is
of
not a
having.
problem either. Like, honestly, like having moments like this where you just like, okay, I'm just chill, I'm just ruminate, and then having the time to like let things settle. I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times like artists don't take that momentum. I have a really great friend named Dre. We just had a conversation about this in our last podcast, and that like he is satisfied, at least at the moment, that he doesn't feel pressure to create.
Mm-hmm.
And financially, he doesn't need to find that. At the same time, he is always on that verge of worrying about like, but should I anyway? As a creator and as a person who loves to create, shouldn't I just create? So he goes back and forth in that cycle of I should rest, but
I've
should I rest though?
actually
Yeah.
I've actually, like, that's something that I'm doing now. Like I've actually planned out a couple of weeks of not writing, of not
Mm.
creating, just absorbing. And like that's why I've been like taking off of social media like slowly, and I've closed my documents in a way. I just stopped a lot, like just stopped thinking about things and
Mm-hmm.
just focusing on just growing rather than putting out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like just absorbing rather than taking out. Like a bank. Like I want to save my money first before I start spending it
Mm-hmm.
again.
Invest in you.
So like I've like that's something that I'm doing now, and I think it's a good time to do that now because I'm not doing anything else.
Just true. Most
Yeah,
of the
but
world is not doing.
I feel like I've also put pressure on myself when I started my publishing company, because it's like now I have to actually make money because it's a business now
Mm-hmm.
that I have to focus on the business part of it. So that has motivated me, but that's also scared me because it's like, like am I writing this because it's coming from me, or am I writing this just so I can make money? And I know that it's a formula that has made authors money in the past. So I think that's another thing that's blocking me, is like, am I just writing this just to write it, or is this actually like a work of my soul in a way?
Mm-hmm. No, I get that. And then like the different motivations in terms of just like, well, what is this? What is this art form for? Is it for me? Is it for someone else? Is it more
Mm-hmm.
directed as a more evangelistic effort to help other people, or is it more
Yeah.
like self help, like just for myself, and I just needed to do it for me?
Like
Like,
I've been trying to chase like the feeling that I've had when I wrote my first book. My first book was so like, this is like my life's project. Like this is me. But like my projects, my books after that, it's sort of just like, oh, this is just something that I'm writing for fun, or this is something I'm, and it's just, it doesn't have that momentum that I've had, like
Hmm.
that satisfactory feeling that you get when you finish something. I don't know if that makes sense,
No, it
but
does. Like
yeah.
sometimes like even with my book, there's certain parts where just like I wish I spent more time, spent more time with the cover, more time with certain chapters. I wish I could add this one in. Like you kind of go through the aspect where it's like, is this like the best work that? And sometimes you just need to let a work just sit and just like, okay, it's done.
Mm-hmm.
Like it may not be perfect, but like sometimes the work doesn't have to be perfect. Um,
Mm-hmm.
some does, like you get the opportunity sometimes to either like spend more time with the work. Sometimes you can readjust a work that you felt was imperfect, and you come back years later and it's like, oh, now I can perfect it. That's why I'm really excited about my book. Is like now there's a release from the publisher, I can readdress, see what the narrative was within my memoir, and then maybe readdress it. But yeah, like all of this being said, is like this is just like the toil of being a creative. It's just kind of finding those outlets. Like even for right now, I haven't written too many poems, and my memoir process is going slow. But as a creative, I'm creating like different productions, podcasts. I'm creating like stuff online, and I'm stretching that muscle right now, so that once this muscle is like fully stretched, I feel like I'm strengthened so much in this. This can kind of go into more of a like cruise control, and then I can go back and then really re-stretch my muscles on other aspects of my life creatively.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean sometimes, and that's why I asked you in the very beginning. It's just like, well, what is motivating you? Like what are
Mm-hmm.
different aspects? Because sometimes like you need to get that monkey off your back. Like you need to just like, okay, like let me just do this real quick. Like I've been wanting to do this, let's just do it. Like photography was like that at one point for me, which is like I just need to get a camera, I just need to start taking pictures. And the more I did it, the more it's just like, wow, I just need to get this monkey off my back, but this monkey became a gorilla. Like, and because sometimes like you just need to go down a path, and it's like, well, maybe that path was like um really the path you needed to go on. There was a quote from a preaching that I heard when all this started from Bishop T.D. Jakes. He was talking about talking to his son, and his son was actually just about to graduate college. He was doing audio. He was an audio technician, and he was about to graduate. And like they were sitting at the dinner table, and he asked his dad. I was like, dude. No, he didn't say dude. He said, he said it's like, so dad, like, what if this is not the path for me? Like, and this is on the verge of his graduation, and his dad like lovingly said, don't worry, son, if this is not the path, it'll be the path that leads to the path. In that, where in that saying is like, sometimes like sometimes like your detours end up being the real path, or at least leading you into the bigger path that you couldn't see from that angle. So sometimes you need that. I mean, that's why I needed my detour. Sometimes like you need like those little aspects of just like, let me just try this. Sometimes you need that freaking TikTok of those freaking like teleserias that freaking make me laugh every morning. I'm like, what the freak is going on? Like when you do those, okay, I was just like, I don't mean to like switch gears, but I have really enjoyed those. Like I've actually
The
shown my
Filipino TikToks.
yeah, the Filipino TikToks are so
It's
hilarious.
so funny because like I recently like my aunt like had a like it was her first year death anniversary, and like we were doing it on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
So we had like this service, and then we had like a tribute to her, and everyone is kind of sad, and my cousin, kid you not, he was like, let's cheer everyone up with Angela's TikToks. And he showed like my TikToks like on live stream. And it's supposed to be like a funeral death anniversary.
Oh
He's like,
no.
here's Angela's TikToks. And it was like, I was like, oh God.
Oh no. But
But
everyone's
it was
just
like,
like
but everyone was just like, what are we watching? Like, what is this?
oh no. That's
Yeah.
funny. No, I mean, but they're really cool, and sometimes you just need that outlet because, like, especially like maybe that's it. Like, they're your whole aspect of like you saying, of course, like that you're an actor, but being in quarantine, it's kind of hard to scratch that itch. So maybe that this is like
Mm.
a certain outlet that you needed to scratch, and until it's satisfied, maybe you just need to scratch it until it's done, and then you'll find another itch, if that makes
For me,
sense. Yeah.
like making TikToks was more of like scratching my video editing, because I used to love editing videos.
Mm.
Like I used to be on YouTube. So I used to love just editing videos. It's not like TikTok has a lot of acting and fooling around with it, but I just loved like piecing together videos and editing it,
Mm-hmm.
and that's pretty cool. That was pretty fun. But I'm not doing TikTok anymore. I've retired from
That's okay.
TikTok.
That's fine. You ended on a high note, you know, like it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
yeah. You ended your streak like, you ended on a perfect streak, so it's good.
Everyone is on TikTok now, so it's like it's getting crowded in
Oh, heck
here.
yeah. But like it
Uh,
is the platform
Leaving.
if you really want to get known, that is the platform. I don't want to say need, but I am greatly considering at least doing like stream clips on TikTok and then just sharing them on there just for that, just because it is like popping off
It
right now.
is,
It really
yeah,
is.
that
So
is the platform to be on.
yeah, but I'm not the whole like I'm not the I don't know, like I don't do the whole like, oh, dance challenge, and I don't have a thoughts
Yeah,
body, so I'm like
I like I the dance part of TikTok is it doesn't appeal to me either. It's just everyone's doing the same thing.
hmm.
I like
Yeah,
the people who are like creating like skits and stuff.
that is dope.
Because
Yeah,
my other dream is to be on SNL. I think that's my biggest dream
that
of
would be
all is to
dope.
host SNL.
Host
That would
SNL.
be amazing. Yeah.
How about writer, or do you want to just host?
No, I want to host.
You want to host?
I wanna act.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
That'd be dope. That'd be dope. That'd be dope. I am looking forward to that
Putting it
time.
out into the universe.
Hey, putting it out into the
Yeah.
universe.
Hmm.
Hopefully. Oh my gosh, I was gonna make a morbid joke. I was like putting it off into the universe. Hopefully your dad doesn't die every single time you try. That's your book. That's your book. Sorry.
Oh gosh.
And on that note,
And on that note,
we want to thank you guys.
are we gonna do the 10 questions
Oh, we
that
can,
James?
but you have to do them fast though. You have to do them fast.
I mean, we don't have to do
You
it.
know what we can do? Let's do this. Let's end. We got like a few more minutes, just like less than 5 minutes. Let's just do one question at a time. There's 10 of them, so at least we have one for
So
every for 10
we're gonna do 10 pet podcasts. I don't know if I have material
for 10
for 10
podcasts.
podcasts.
I can just do. What do you want to do?
Why don't we just like end it like right now,
Okay.
but then we can like start a new one like right after, because like it's just like just thinking like my schedule is like I don't know when's the next time
Okay.
I'll be here. So like I don't know if this is too ambitious, but like we can probably just film like 2 podcasts
Okay.
like
And then see
right
where it goes.
now.
Oh, right now?
Yeah.
Oh, right now, right now?
Yeah. Yeah, like that's what I'm saying. Like that's why it could be ambitious. Like just end it and then we'll cut it off and then we'll pretend we're just starting a new one.
Okay.
Because I don't know when's the next time I'm gonna be
We'll
here.
pretend we're starting a new one. We
Yeah.
can change our shirts. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Bathroom break or
we
something.
can do that. We can do a bathroom break and stuff like that. But we can after we end today's podcasts, and then next time
Mm-hmm.
you see the podcast, it'll be a totally different day.
Mm-hmm.
But we can go ahead and do that. But we'll end it right here. Real quick shout outs. In terms of social medias where you can find us. You can find me at Kuya Poetry on Instagram. You can also find me at Kuya Games, twitch.tv/Kuya Games as well too. And your turn.
You could just find me at angelahilario.com. Um, yeah.
Scrumptious lessons. Try to
Scrumptious. If
scrumptious
you can
lessons.
find me on Instagram, that means it was meant to be.
It was meant to be.
So
All right. But once again, my name's KP.
I'm Angela.
All right, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Bye.